I've gone into Blades of Fire knowing that I'm not the target demographic. Blades of Fire is an action-adventure game with a twist on Souls-like combat, one that drew me in to play a game that I may have not otherwise been interested in. The Souls-like is not my favourite style of gameplay, and with my experience limited to mostly Elden Ring and Ghost of Tsushima. Souls-like games require patience in their combat, timing strikes, and mastering dodges and parries. It's not something I find particularly easy, so I struggled to get into it. That being said, I've played Blades of Fire the same way I played Elden Ring. Slow, tedious progress in which I died a lot. At times, my progress was slow and frustrating, but despite the issues I had with many aspects of the game, there is a charm at the heart of it. Hi, I'm Ben for Smash Jump, and this is my review of Blades of Fire with editing by Stuart. In Blades of Fire, you play as Aaron, a blacksmith granted great power on a quest to kill the Queen. Aaron is joined on this quest with a young companion called Adso, who, though lacking the martial skill and strength of Aaron, is well versed in history and magic, providing Aaron with the vital assistance he will need along the way. The dynamic between Aaron and Adso is one clearly modelled on Kratos and Atreus, but it often feels quite forced. Within the story, these characters have only just met, but almost immediately have a father and son-esque relationship that doesn't quite land. With a little more time to foster their relationship, it would have worked far better, but given that they meet for the first time in the game's opening, it just seemed odd. The story's presentation often left me unsure as to what was actually going on. The overarching narrative of the game is focused around traversing the world in order to reach and kill the Queen, but each area has a story that feels entirely self-contained. The zones themselves are varied in design, but there's little connective tissue, and the pacing of zones often feels uneven. In some areas, I find myself circling again and again to uncover the missing step required to move on, while the next zone would be a clear path with little to no thought required to figure out what needed to be done. The game doesn't explicitly tell you what your current objective is, so a lot of time will be spent navigating the world to find the next trigger for the story. Sometimes this is more guided, but for the most part you are free to figure it out in your own way. If you are struggling, there is an option to show you where the next objective is that can be accessed through the pause menu. As the story's presentation is often vague, Adso is intended to provide clues about your objective, information about your current area and the characters you have met. While these tidbits were interesting additions that made the world feel a little more fleshed out, the information to guide you forward was often vague and generic to the overall goal of the zones, rather than tailored to your specific task. Though Adso and Aran's discussions of the world and its lore are interesting, the world still feels abandoned as the only people you interact with are enemies and allies. The first pillar of gameplay is combat, which is exactly what you might expect for a Souls-like. Dodges and parries will be your bread and butter. The unique aspect of combat for Blades of Fire is that it comprises entirely of directional attacks. On the PS5, square, triangle, circle and cross will attack left, head, right and body respectively, and you will need to flow between the direction you swing your weapon and the strike type in order to ensure maximum damage. I found the system to be an interesting take on the combat beyond the usual light, heavy and ranged attacks. Blades of Fire unfortunately doesn't capitalise on the combat system to keep it engaging. Every foe will be weak to a strike type such as blunt damage from a warhammer or piercing damage from a sword. Some weapons will only be able to do one type of damage, and other weapons will be able to switch between different types. When targeting an enemy, each part of their body will be highlighted in red, orange or green. Green areas will take maximum damage from your weapon and strike type. Orange areas are partially armoured and might take only 40 to 60% of damage. And red areas will be heavily armoured and receive less than 20%. Enemies you face as essentially cannon fodder are fully highlighted in green, and any attack will take them out with ease. Additionally, heavy attacks can be made by holding down the attack button for that direction and have the ability to mutilate your foe, which will lop off a body part when you kill them. This starts off as a cool way to take down enemies, with it being extremely satisfying to decapitate a foe in a single strike. But Like the rest of combat, there just isn't enough variation. After a while, combat had settled into a rhythm where weak enemies would be struck down in a single heavy strike, with the engaging combat being against stronger enemies who require working around their attack pattern to get a strike in. Despite the rote nature of the combat, it did offer some challenge, partially due to my difficulty in mastering parrying in most games, opening myself up to more damage than I would otherwise be taking. A few other aspects did contribute to the game's challenge though. One is the difficulty level, which will change parry timings for enemies and increase damage done and received. I am a big advocate for games offering extensive difficulty modifiers to allow players to tailor difficulty to their playstyle and ability, so it was disappointing that Blaze of Fire only featured traditional easy, medium and hard settings. I kept the game on Steel, the hardest and recommended difficulty, and it was challenging but not too challenging. However, this quickly changed when I entered the game's second area of the Crimson Fort. Here, I encountered a harsh jump in difficulty. The area features a roaming mini-boss, an increase in enemy density, and a maze-like structure of narrow corridors, and I spent many more hours stuck here than I suspect I was intended to. The narrow spaces made dodging more difficult, fighting enemies and the camera to ensure I could see where I was dodging and not getting stuck against the wall. In tight spaces and situations involving more than 2 enemies, the combat starts to severely falter. Switching between weapons and strikes mid-combat while also attempting to dodge and block enemies from multiple angles becomes quite cumbersome. In a large crowd, attacks become ineffectual with target locks bouncing between enemies and attacks bouncing off enemies or off the environment itself. I found myself up against a major progress roadblock here for a long time, pushing me to just drop the difficulty so I could have an easier time navigating to just get through the area. Here, all of the worst aspects of the game came together for a brutally frustrating experience, to the point where I actually questioned if I would even continue this review. While combat is probably the biggest aspect of gameplay, crafting is definitely the most important. Every weapon you wield has been handcrafted by you. The level of customization varies, with more options unlocked through shrines commonly found in the world. You start off with a few basic designs and can earn new schematics by killing the enemies that wield them. When forging, you have a lot of options to tailor your weapons to how you play, including blade length, the type of steel to be used, among more. Each option will contribute to the stats, allowing you to balance between attack stats, defensive stats, and durability stats. Crafting ties to exploration in a way that makes both more compelling. Exploring will provide materials to use in crafting as you defeat enemies, shrines will unlock new options for weapons, while chests will include skill scrolls allowing you to craft higher level quality weapons or increase health. Weapon quality is important as this determines how many times you'll be able to repair it before it permanently breaks. When first crafting a weapon, you complete a forge minigame. In this minigame, you strike metal segments of the blade to match the weapon's shape. The closer you match it, the more stars you get, with a 5-star weapon repairable 5 times. The minigame takes a little getting used to. To get segments in the right places, you change the strength, size, and tilt of each strike you make, allowing you to finally control how the segments will move. I really enjoyed the minigame. It helped to sell the immersion of forging, created a stronger bond with the weapons made, while also making the weapon's durability have a purpose, though there is a welcome feature to reuse your previous best minigame score. Forging is a frequent occurrence as weapons break or are dropped out in the world when you die, with each new weapon representing a jump in quality and strength. The crafting in Blaze of Fire is simple, but it has all the depth that the combat lacks. Most of the map is a series of narrow tunnels with open spaces you might encounter enemies in. The game promises a lot of freedom when it presents the world to you, though it is quite linear and often frustrating when cues for where to go next aren't as apparent as they need to be. Each area has different routes that can be used to navigate around, with unlockable shortcuts to make traversal quicker, and anvils scattered around to fast travel to the forge to craft weapons, repair and recycle weapons, or rest to replenish health and respawn enemies. The linear natures of areas really hindered the experience of exploring the world. Once it became apparent, exploration started to feel far less rewarding, instead becoming an exercise in following all the routes to uncover everything rather than naturally finding things, made more apparent by the lack of visible points of interest to guide your exploration. I feel as though I'm in several minds about Blaze of Fire. I can only approach this through my own experience as a novice to the Souls-like experience, and as a novice, there are elements that I may not have as much patience with or draw as much enjoyment from as the seasoned player. That being said, kudos has to go out to Blaze of Fire for having an interesting enough premise to draw in a potential convert, and I did, for the most part, enjoy my time with Blaze of Fire. On offer here is an interesting story with engaging characters, simple and gorgeous environments. There's a charm to the writing and aesthetic that is reminiscent of the Xbox 360 PS3 era games such as Fable and Brutal Legend, and a stunningly haunting soundtrack to accompany it all. Where it perhaps let down the most is its uneven pacing, characterization that can feel unnatural and unearned, and a simplistic combat system flawed enough to tip the balance from fun and challenging to pure frustration. Though I was enjoying the game, by the 25th hour of my playthrough the repetitive and frustrating combat was starting to take its toll, and I had about hit my limit. I'll no doubt keep chipping away at Blaze of Fire, but the uneven pacing and flawed combat has sucked much of the fun out of the game for me. Once again, I've been Ben for Smash Jump. This video has been edited by Stuart. We received a review copy provided by the publisher for this game. If you'd like to read the full review, you can do so at smashjump.com, and I'd suggest you head there for more reviews, features, and news. Thanks for watching.